Okay, welcome to day 3 of our first virtual user conference. I hope you guys have really enjoyed the first couple days if you've been able to attend. We've had some excellent user presentations as well as presentations from folks internally. Today we're going to have a variety of talks on Sample Manager. First starting out with me for the product update and then a freezer management preview. We'll have a user presentation from Patrick Leyshock today on data management in precision oncology, as well as our finishing up with extending Sample Manager with LabKey server from Steve. If you plan to stay with us all day today, if you have questions, please ask them in the little Q&A section that's on your Zoom window. You don't have to wait until the end. We'll be moderating these questions and sort of answering them as time allows at the end. And if we don't get to them live during the presentation, we'll absolutely follow up with an email. So please bring on the questions as much as you have them today. So we'll get started with the Sample Manager product update. My name is Brakke. For those of you who don't know me, I'm both an account manager here at LabKey as well as a product manager for Sample Manager, and I'm really excited to share our first real product update on Sample Manager as we launched earlier this year. If you haven't heard of this product before, LabKey Sample Manager is an end-to-end sample management application that's really designed to bring greater efficiency to your sample processing while also providing this unified view of your samples and related data, as well as now storage location. So as a scientist in my previous life, I really wanted to bring this product into the lab and really make it useful for people. I know how hard it is to get people to adopt electronic systems in particular within a lab. And so we really strive to have our emphasis be on facilitating lab work and enable structured management of sample related data. So Sample Manager is a little bit different from other sample management or freezer management products right now. What I found both in my research and also when I was in the lab is that a lot of current products are really freezer centric. They also really lack end-to-end sample management tools, which means that we had a variety of systems to sort of aggregate these together. And they're also really can be difficult to deploy and administer. And so for Sample Manager, we really wanted our focus to be on this comprehensive sample data capture, and we'll continue to sort of expand and improve on that as we understand the needs of our clients. We also designed it to facilitate full sample tracking and really with an emphasis on this ease of use and adoption. So somebody in the lab can join the lab, look at the software, and hopefully pick it up within a day or two. So as I mentioned before, we did launch this product earlier this year. So really the main page here should be, we launched Sample Manager in February, but since then we've actually implemented a variety of new features as well that I wanted to cover. Firstly, we added sample sources, which allows folks to track the sample origins and really reduce that redundant data entry of saying this sample came from, you know, this rock or this person or this lab, where whatever the source may be. Sample timeline, which really gives a great sense of chain of custody for these samples and auditing. It's very sort of sample centric, easy to use and easy to understand what's happened from start to finish for your sample. We've also enabled an integration with the bartender printing software for easy customizable label printing. And finally, which will be sort of the highlight of my next talk, freezer management, which of course will allow for intuitive storage and tracking movement of samples in and out of your freezer. So before I jump into my live demo today, I kind of wanted to talk about this end-to-end sample tracking. This is just a screenshot of our menu bar. We have enabled source types, again, to provide that context for your sample origin. You can both add the source type as well as any metadata associated with that source. Sample types, of course, to enable sample registration and that metadata capture around your sample. Assays that will allow for direct linking of your assay data to the samples that are registered in the system. And storage, so an entire tool that will allow you to view the sample in your virtual storage solution. And then finally being able to assign your samples to workflow jobs and really sort of track the work happening in your lab at any given time. So now I'm just going to go straight into the sample manager demo. I have sort of highlighted here that today I'm going to do a vibranium demo. So really to highlight the flexibility and customizable nature of this system. We're going to be in this Marvel universe to sort of show you that we're not restricted to, traditional sort of clinical lab samples. We can really sort of customize and create any samples that people want to track in the system. And so this is the main landing page of Sample Manager. You can see that I immediately have a sense of the type of samples that are being stored in the system, as well as sort of the amount of these samples. I can view them in a variety of different ways if I'm more interested in sort of what's been going on in the last month, or perhaps today, which of course I haven't done anything. It really gives me a sense of what I have in this system and what I have in my lab. I can also change this view to look at the assay run. So again, sort of what type of assays am I housing in this system, as well as how many runs of each of these things do I have, just to give me a good sense of what's going on in my lab. I can also create samples from this dashboard, so I don't need to go through a variety of other things. I can just select this as soon as I start my day and create the samples that I need to. We also have a panel showing you the recent assay data, and this allows you to really understand what's been going on in the lab. Of course, I was busy last week preparing for this demo. I can also jump into certain assay types and then import data directly again from this dashboard. And finally here, we also have our workflow jobs list. And this really is tailored towards the work that I've been assigned in the lab. And you can see that I've got 3 different sets of work that are varying both in due dates and then in priority. So if I filter out only to the urgent priority, I can see that, oh, my user conference demo is the most urgent, which makes sense for today. And of course, because nobody's acting in a bubble in the lab, we can also see the active jobs. And so not only is the work that I have to do being captured here, but also work of team members, and in this case, Matt. I can start a new job again, excuse me. I can also go to my jobs home and really explore and interrogate that, which we'll do a little bit later. So the first thing I want to do, because this is a sample manager application, I want to jump straight into my sample types. And so we're going to, again, we've got all of these different sample types that I've created and configured, but today we're really going to be focused in that Marvel universe in Vibranium. So the sample type overview, you can see that I've sort of assigned it this label color, which if you sort of recall, that was in the graph on my dashboard. It will come up a lot when we start looking at freezer management in my talk later. And I've got this description and also the naming pattern, or the way that I want this system to generate my automatic IDs. We've got a little over 1,000 samples here. If I was interested in starting to filter out or do some work, I can start selecting through and filtering. Maybe I'm only looking for samples that are clear with a purity level that's greater than 3. And that really gives me sort of this subset of samples of 53. I can choose to, select all of these, and I could add them to a workflow job. I could also decide that I want to edit them. And in this case, I want to edit these samples in bulk. And you can see that there's all of the fields that we've customized. And this project field is actually something that I haven't filled out yet. And so in this case, I actually want to enter that these are my 53 samples that I'm going to use for this demo. I can update those, and then of course, all of those 53 samples now have the demo project, and I could use that as a further filter when I'm doing work later. If I jump into a certain sample, you can see that all of the metadata that was in that sample type grid is represented here as well. Again, this is metadata that I have sort of selected these fields, as well as this new project field that has the LabKey user demo in it. I can also see where it exists in our storage location if we do have this stored in a freezer, and sort of see that path that it's in my user conference freezer, on shelf 2 in rack 1, in this plate, in this well of D4. I can also highlight over this and see that the last comment that we made in the freezer is that it's for the demo. I can see my stored amount and freeze thaw count. I can also click on this and go into the freezer management, which we're actually going to do in the next talk, so I'll skip this for now. And then I really get a good sense of this 1006 sample of where it came from. So I set up these sample origins or sample sources for vibranium samples that include what type of mine that these samples may have come from. And in this case, we can see that it's the Wakanda mine with these given coordinates, as well as maybe a plant that was found in that mine. And again, all of these are sort of customized fields that I created for this demo. If we had a deeper sense of lineage for the samples, we could go over to our lineage tab and really interrogate that and navigate through. And so in this case, I might be interested in, well, how many other samples have been generated from plant 1? And we can see that there are 197. I can double click on this and really get sort of back into that that specific plant, and again, sort of navigate the lineage tree that way. For my 1006 sample, I can also see the assay data that I've uploaded for it and what's associated here. And so if I want to interrogate this further or export this for further analysis, I would be able to do that really simply here. I can also, of course, import more data if this is sort of the page that I've come to do that. I can also view the workflow jobs that this sample has been assigned, and in this case, we only have one workflow job of that demo that I mentioned earlier. It looks like, part of that workflow job is 20 other samples. We're two-thirds of the way through, and then of course, this is of urgent priority. And then really one of my favorite features that I mentioned we had developed this year is this sample timeline. And this sense of being able to quickly look at and audit what has happened to a certain sample really excites me, because a lot of the work when I was in the lab that I did is sort of trying to figure out why are there data discrepancies and what happened to that. And I was rummaging through paper. And so this gives folks a really good sense of what's going on. We can see when the sample was registered and all of the things that have happened in the system. Of course, you can imagine if the sample wasn't only 2 weeks old, that this list could get very, very long. So we can actually filter this as well on just things that I might be interested in. For example, just looking at sort of sample update events. And if I look at that, I can see when the sample was updated and really when it was last updated. And we can see here in the current status, again, whether or not it's in storage, if it has a workflow job assigned to it, and when that last event happened. In this case, if I highlight our last event, we can actually see the data modifications that happened as well. And so really for this, thorough understanding of what's happened to your sample in the lifetime of its existence in this application. We're able to track every single modification and change that's happened. And so really, the biggest thing here is that I added that project. So I've also mentioned a few times sort of this idea of workflow. So what I really want to do is go back and look at our workflow job that the sample has been assigned to. There are a variety of ways I can get to it in the application. That's just one of them. So this is a workflow job that was created based on a template of new vibranium samples. I have an understanding of sort of what this job entails in terms of when the work needs to be started and the due date, who it's assigned to, and what the priority is. I can also notify people. So if I'm working with a PI or a collaborator and they want to know exactly where I'm at in the process of my work, or possibly a manager, I can actually add them to this notification list, and they're going to get an email every time I make a change or an update on this workflow job. We've got our list of tasks here, which, because they've been assigned from a template, are very very standardized for this process. That we want to receive the sample, we have this physical properties test or assay that we're doing, and then we also want to measure the radioactivity of these samples. I can jump into these tasks and sort of see where I'm at. I can change the task owner if I need to reassign work for some reason. I can also leave comments. And on some of these tasks, we actually have assay data associated with them. For example, in our physical properties test, we have assigned that to the physical properties assay, and then the radioactivity measurement also is the radioactivity assay. Before I import this data, though, I want to see sort of what else about this workflow job can we uncover. And if I go to the samples, we can see sort of the list of samples that's been selected. My 1006 sample is right here. If I needed to add or remove samples, I would be able to do that from this interface, as well as looking at the assay data that's already been uploaded for these samples. And so we can see that both the physical properties, which makes sense, I completed that task, as well as the radioactivity has been added. And so that makes me sort of think, actually, this task is done. I just forgot to say, complete this task. And so I can do that and finish this workflow job. And the last thing I really want to show you guys here is getting samples into the system. So if I had received a sample manifest today, I'd be able to upload these samples, and all that I know actually about these samples are how many I'm getting and where they're coming from. So that source itself. So I don't have any information about the color or the purity yet, and I'll end up adding that later. And so I can actually select my manifest here and see that, yes, it was collected yesterday, and these are the two origins that we have. I can import these samples and see again, we don't have these in storage, we don't have the color purity level. I can choose to update these. I can update them now in a grid and sort of change, update them as I'm receiving them into the lab. And then I think they're all going to be liquid here. And then I can assign these to a new workflow job. So if I select them again, I can either start a completely new job, I can start them with these selected samples, or add them to an existing job. In this case, I want to actually start a new workflow job. And so I'm going to select that, choose my template, which is this new vibranium sample analysis, because that's what I want to do with it. I'm going to name this job. If you don't provide a name, the system will give you a name. I can also, I'm busy today presenting, so I'm going to give Adam this work to do. I'll also maybe just add myself. Maybe I want to get notified of when he's going to do this work, and assign him a due date of tomorrow, which is maybe or maybe not very reasonable. And because I actually created this from a template, my job tasks are already defined. I can't change those, but I can change who the specific tasks are assigned to. My samples that I selected are here, and if I had any files, maybe images of the samples or SOPs that I wanted to add, I would be able to do that here as well. So now we've created this job, I can get to work. In this case, I'm actually going to stop the live demo. We'll come back. If you're itching to see freezer management, we're going to come back to that at 9:30. And I'm going to go back to my slides here. And hopefully I was able to demonstrate a lot of these features for you. So this easy sample registration, the sample-centric freezer management is coming next. The integrated assay data that really will allow for quality control and assay completion. And then this really intuitive task-based workflow to sort of manage these standard lab processes and work. We, of course, in true LabKey fashion, have upcoming sample manager features that we want to implement. Main things for the coming year are quality control tools to sort of really track the quality of your assay data, enhancing the dashboards to help you get work done, and implementing barcode scanning support. And really, if you've been to the last two talks, you've heard from both Adam and Bernie that we always rely on our clients and our potential clients for developing new features. We really do want to listen to what you want and what you need. And so we really do want to hear from you in this case and help us build a product that's actually going to work for your lab. You've probably heard that we're providing user testing. We're doing that for freezer management as well. So if you get an email from Will or the LabKey communications team, please sign up for that if you're a scientist and interested in helping us develop that tool even further. So you may be wondering now how you can get Sample Manager. If you are new to LabKey or if you're a current community edition, you can also you can choose to purchase Sample Manager as a standalone hosted product, or if you're this community edition user, you can always upgrade to a LabKey Premium Edition, because LabKey Sample Manager is included in all of our LabKey Server Premium Editions. And if you're interested in learning more about Sample Manager, please register for a demo. You can go to labkey.com and sign up for one. Myself or Jason or Steve would love to show you this more and get your feedback. Sign up, as I mentioned, for the freezer management user testing, and then stay tuned. We've got 2 more presentations on Sample Manager, and so I'm sure we'll cover a lot of that content then as well. So now I'll take questions. Steve, let me know what we've got.
Yeah, there's a couple of questions from the audience here. First, is the data import in Sample Manager connected to, for example, a LabKey server data set? And that is data from the workflows in Sample Manager. Is it connected to a LabKey server data set?
I'm assuming in this case, the LabKey server data set we're talking about is study, and the study data sets, and no, they're not currently connected right now. Workflow is actually in its own schema, but the assay data that is uploaded in Sample Manager can be copied to study. I'm getting a little bit in the weeds here, to a LabKey study in the same way that you would be able to do that in server. And I think Steve's actually got a great presentation on this later.
I'm actually going to show that at the end. Another question here, can the Sample Manager be integrated with lab instruments?
Right now, we don't have automatic integration of lab instruments. And I think, you know, our choice behind that currently is that we don't know, there's so many different lab instruments out there. We don't know what people are interested in. And so I'd love to talk to you more about what instruments might be of interest here, but certainly we do accept tabular format assay data files, and if you extend with LabKey Server, there's a lot more options for you there as well.
And great. And another one, what options are there for adding custom code and or business logic? For example, sample import processing or custom JavaScript?
Yeah, so again, I would probably encourage this user to look at LabKey Server, and that's really the platform for deep configuration and customization. Sample Manager on its own as a hosted product is really designed for folks that aren't interested in customizing, in configuration and developing code. And so we're trying to make that as easy as possible. But that would be somebody to go to LabKey Server as well and check out that.
And that's it from the audience so far.
Okay, great. So I think we'll just get started. I'm going to present the freezer management preview now, and then of course we'll have our user presentation and then Steve's presentation as well. So hopefully you're just continuing to join us, but if you're just signing in, I wanted to give a brief update on what Sample Manager is. And really, Sample Manager allows for sample registration, integrated assay data, and this intuitive task-based workflow. And of course, today, what this presentation is for is to talk about our sample-centric freezer management solution that will capture sample data as well as the storage location. So what do I mean when I am talking about sample-centric freezer management? I've used a lot of freezer systems that are not what I would consider sample-centric, and so I really wanted to define that for folks, is that samples in Sample Manager are not dependent on storage status. So when I enter a sample into Sample Manager, as I did in the previous demo, that wasn't tied to storage. They can be registered independently from that storage location, which means I can register them ahead of time. I don't have to put them in a staging location and then move them over to the final location. That registration, association with sources and metadata can all happen before they end up physically going in storage, if they go into storage at all. Also, sample data can persist beyond the physical sample. So if the sample is consumed or has to be discarded for some reason, you can actually continue to persist your sample data even without sort of that physical sample in your storage location. And that's really helpful when you want to look at what's happened historically or over time. You don't have to then go through and crawl through an audit log and see when was a sample discarded and what was associated with it at that point. So that's, again, sort of the sample-centric freezer management. And then, of course, regardless of storage status, you can assign samples to work and upload assay data. You can assign their origins or the sources and sample lineage with these samples, and really giving you sort of, again, that holistic view of what's happened to a sample, sort of regardless of if you decide to put it in a storage location or not. So a few of the freezer management features that we have and plan to have for launch is this customizable freezer hierarchy. So really allowing you to create a virtual version of your physical storage in the lab. That flexible storage mechanism, which allows you to do that. And then pretty much throughout the site, you're going to see that we have capacity calculations. So you really can understand, where's the next place I want to put my samples or add new samples. The storage basics, right? It wouldn't be a freezer management system if we didn't have the ability to add, move, discard samples. And again, discarding from the freezer is different than deleting the sample and that metadata. Checking it in and out, and so upon that, incrementing the freeze thaw count and decrementing the storage amount as needed. We also have both grid and box view of the freezer contents. I put box here in quotations because we actually have a variety of sort of final locations of where your samples can end up in. And right now we have plates and bags as well, and that will soon be customizable for you too. And then location timeline for, again, this like really easy auditing and being able to understand what's happened in a given location over time. So now I'll jump into this live demo here. We've got a similar dashboard that we saw for Sample Manager. I can quickly understand what types of samples I have in the freezer. So we've got 5 different freezers here, and they contain a variety of different sample types. I'm sure, as you know, as you start to use applications more and more, color coding, you'll be able to sort of memorize what that color coding is. But if I'm somebody brand new or interested in just sort of viewing the freezer on an occasional basis, I can always look at this legend and see, oh, these dark gray samples are vibranium, we've got DNA and PBMCs, plasma samples, serum, urine, blood, that kind of thing. And this is really just giving us the breakdown of the types of samples that exist in any of these freezers. I can also look at the number of samples that I have in storage overall, and because we're focused in this Marvel universe today, I've got the most samples stored are my vibranium samples, but I also have a variety of other samples here as well. I can also view the samples that I have checked out, which for me is really important, because if I'm interested in samples that are sort of currently checked out of the freezer because people are running assays on them, I might want to check up on that work and see, is there a workflow job associated with it? Is there something, does somebody need help? There's 49 vibranium samples checked out. Did they forget to check them back in? What's going on there? And then also the samples checked out by user. So in this case, of course, I've checked out the most samples because this is my local instance, but we also have Adam and Susan doing some work as well. This can be very helpful if you've got a staffing change or just want to help evaluate your team's workload. I could also see my my sample activity. And this is really giving me what I've done recently. And so it will allow me, if I'm working on this, 1532, I just discarded it. And now I want to go and maybe update some metadata properties. I'll be able to link to that very quickly. I can also view all of the samples that have been checked out by users, as well as all of my recent activity or the recent activity from others. We have the freezer list here. So again, those 5 freezers that I've configured, I've named them all. I've put some metadata around them. Today we're going to look at the user conference freezer, of course. So I'll jump into that. And we can see that this is an active freezer. I can label this as a backup or defrosting if we want to have a good view of sort of what's happening live in the lab. I've added these specific freezer details here as well. And we can see the capacity. So we have 605 spaces available so far. But maybe when I start to sort of look into this hierarchy and say, oh, I've got shelf 1 and rack 1 and rack 2, and I've got shelf 2. Oh, and I just have 1 rack. Maybe I really need to add a second rack, right? We've left half of the shelf empty because we didn't need it, but I just got these racks in, and so I want to sort of add more space to my freezer. So I'd be able to edit that. I can edit all of that metadata, which we're going to leave for now. And then for shelf 2, I can actually drag in and say, yeah, I want another rack here, and I'm going to call it rack 2. Maybe I want some boxes in here as well, and so we'll just add these in. I can also select from this dropdown of what this box size might be. This is a tool that's under development right now. So we will actually enable users to be able to create their own dimensions of their storage for launch. And so now we can see I've added that second rack. And we've increased our capacity here. So we now have 686 spaces available. If I'm interested in sort of looking at a certain box, I can navigate through that hierarchy and view the 10 by 10 box that I've created here. There's a lot going on. We've got a variety of samples that are checked out. And so these red squares indicate that samples are checked out. I can decide to check in a single sample or check in many samples at once. I can tell the system how much of the samples that I've used during checkout. So if my assay, for example, requires 200 microliters, I can add that in. I can also add a comment of why did I check this in and out. And then I can check in those samples and we can see sort of, if we highlight this again, we have the decremented amount and then an increase in the freeze thaw count as well. We've also enabled the option for users to be able to edit these directly without a check-in and check-out location, check-in and check-out event. And the reason for this is, you know, a lot of times I have received samples that, you know, they have told me is 2 mils. I don't actually measure it, but I sort of eyeball it and that makes sense. But maybe after a couple assays, I realize, oh, it's not 1.8, it's 1.5. I want my freezer management system to be the most accurate representation of the physical storage as possible. And maybe the freeze thaw count, it needs to be changed as well. Maybe the check-in, check-out event was an accident. I need to reduce that. Possibly, we used to receive frozen samples all the time, and so we wanted to accurately capture that as well. So you would be able to change that freeze thaw count too. We can also see, you know, the vibranium samples are in this dark gray. We've got other serum samples in orange and the DNA samples in this teal here. I can choose to move samples if I want. So if I want to move, you know, it's really serum samples here should not be in this box. I want them somewhere else. So I'm going to actually choose to move these somewhere else. And again, LabKey is going to give me this nice sense of, is there any room in any of these boxes? And some of these boxes, there's not room for these samples. So, you know, we're not even going to bother to go into those and try and select that location. Maybe in this case, I want to add it to my brand new box that I just created. And so I'd be able to do that here and move those samples. I can then sort of dive deep into that box. Or I can choose to stay in this box, which I'm going to choose to do. One of the other cool things that we've implemented here is this idea of location history. So if I select on one of these empty wells that I just moved those serum samples from, I'll be able to see all of the things that have happened in that specific location. And this is important to me in particular because when you're receiving a lot of samples on a daily basis and you think you have 5 samples and so you add 5 samples to your virtual storage but really it's 4, but nobody was there to double check you. You spend a lot of time later down the road, maybe when your box is almost full, realizing that your samples are just 1 or 2 wells off. Like, what's happening? And this will allow you to view, you know, was it ever even added to this system? Do I need to go and check? Had it been moved? Is it, you know, somewhere underneath a freezer somewhere? What's happened to that? And that really gives you a glance into that specific location. And then just sort of finally here, you know, we've looked a lot at the box view. We can also see that all of the samples are in this grid view as well. And so if I needed to filter, samples, for example, on a stored amount, right? I'm only looking for vibranium samples that are above, 1.5 mils, because that's how much I need. I would be able to sort of search for that and get that filtered sample. I can do that both at this sort of box level, but I can also jump up and look at all of the samples in rack 1 and do that there, or go to the one step above and look at the shelf, or sort of search through the entire freezer. Of course, I could also do this from the sample type view, but if I'm already in this freezer area and I want to just start filtering my samples to start performing work, I would be able to do that here as well. And so hopefully you've seen sort of, this tool that's in development right now. We're planning to launch it in January of next year. We are also currently working on a variety of stories for launch, including migration resources. So if you have a current system right now and are looking to switch, please contact us and let us know, what does your system look like? We're targeting a few of the main ones that we know of, but of course, if it's a homegrown system, or you're doing it manually or on paper, or not doing it at all, let us know, and we'd love to be able to support you in that. Customization of the storage options. So as I mentioned, we had that drop down that I showed you when I created the box. Pretty soon we're going to be able to allow you to create dimensions of that box yourself. And then freezer actions were integrated throughout Sample Manager. So in this case, for this demo, I really just showed you the freezer management side of it, because that's what we have so far. But in theory, we want the freezer management tool to be an integrated part of Sample Manager, which means that when you're on sample type views or workflow jobs, things like that, you'll be able to do standard freezer actions. You can check in, check out, you can add, you can remove from the freezer, that kind of thing. And so really just making it an integrated and full experience for users. And I can't reiterate this enough. We want to hear from you. If there's something that I didn't talk about today or I didn't show you, please let us know. We're constantly working on this roadmap and trying to update it. And again, are most interested in helping you do your work. So if there's something missing that's going to help you do your work, we want to know about it. If you're interested, register for a demo. Steve and Jason and I can all demo our freezer management functionality, pretty much sort of like up to the day of what the current development is. You can sign up for the freezer management user testing. So if you saw some things today that you'd love to be able to advise on, Matt would love to hear about it. And then of course, stay tuned for Steve's talk later. So at this point, I'll stop a little bit early for questions if folks have them.
Yeah, there is a really interesting question here. There's a lot of color-coded info in Sample Manager. Any options for people who can't see the colors?
That's a great point. I know that Matt, our UX designer, has always taken this into consideration, and so it's something that I really want to follow up with him on. But right now, the color coding is the main mechanism to quickly view what's going on. But you can also, if the colors aren't, if you can't see colors, or if the colors aren't showing up on your screen or something, we do have the grid view option that really allows you to sort of filter and select based on that as well. But that's a great question, and I'll certainly follow up on that.
No questions yet, but don't be shy, folks.
I think I did mention it, but just in case you missed it, freezer management is part of Sample Manager, and it will be officially launched with the Sample Manager update in January of next year, of 2021. So I think with that, we'll just get started. I'm happy to introduce.
Oh, we got some
go
more
ahead.
here. When can we expect bar scanning?
So that should be a feature we're going to work on pretty early next year. And so I imagine, in the first couple months of 2021, we'll have that available. Sample Manager is a little bit unlike the rest of the LabKey products where we do releases every month. And so really ensuring that you're getting the most up-to-date features as quickly as possible.
And okay, there's a couple more questions here. This may be a question for Matt Y, if he's out there. Tell us about your approach to capture user feedback while developing.
Yeah, so we actually work with a sample manager pack that it consists of a variety of different types of scientists that help us capture sort of what those user requirements might be. User testing, as Matt mentioned yesterday, is something that we do sort of periodically to a broader audience as well. And so this is one of those opportunities to please sign up for user testing, because as helpful as the pack is, and they are really tremendously helpful, it's always nice to get a fresh set of eyes on things. And so we're constantly showing it to different people and trying to get that feedback from them.
Great. And another question, can you show the bartender integration yet?
Oh, yes, absolutely. I think I actually forgot to go through that, and it's going to make me, I'm going to switch over to the demo again. We'll see how smooth this transition is, but we'll get it. So if we go back to my vibranium samples, this is actually a great case now where I'm super happy that I created that LabKey user conference project. So I can filter on my project of my user conference demo. I can select these samples and choose to print them. So in this case, we're both sort of telling you what samples you've selected, but then also the number of copies. So, we're not going to knock you if you're still using paper and need to maybe print your label and put it on a piece of paper that matches the label on the sample. And so you can choose the number of copies here. And then, of course, you can also choose the layout. So if you're familiar with Bartender allows you to have a variety of different layouts. In this case, I just have sort of a generic label layout, but if I had one specifically for vibranium, that would be the one that would show up here. And then I can go ahead and select yes print, which of course I won't here because I don't have a Zebra printer at home, but that would be the way to do it.
Great. And some more questions here. They're coming in here. Will I be able to import data from my legacy freezer system?
Absolutely. So that is something that I brought up in the upcoming features that are under development. We are currently considering what types of migration resources people will need and trying to provide really easy ways for folks to do that. If you have a legacy system, please contact us and let us know what you're using, because we'd love to be able to support you in that.
Okay, another one. You mentioned chain of custody in Sample Manager. Are there similar use cases enabled in freezer management?
Yeah, so actually the freezer management application tool is really part of the Sample Manager application. And so if I'm interested in the chain of custody of a sample that has happened, it actually shows up in my timeline. And you can see for sort of my demo sample that I've been using here, we have the items being moved, added to storage. If it was checked out or discarded, it would show here as well. One of the other things that we're working on for launch is including a filter here that will say we just are looking at storage events. And so you would be able to filter those just on the storage events.
Great. And also, does Sample Manager have role-based security features?
Yes, so there are three roles that we've enabled for Sample Manager. We have sort of the administrative role, which I've been acting in for this demo, but we also have an editors and reader role. And so editors are really people that can do the work. It's sort of what I would imagine, the administrator role might be a lab manager or a power user that sets up what the sample type should look like, what the freezer hierarchy should be, that type of thing. We've got editors that are just allowed to sort of enter, update, and discard data from the system. And then finally our readers, right? So people that are just really interested in what's going on, but maybe it's like a PI you don't want to give access to. And so you just want them to read things and feel like they can be a part of it without actually breaking anything.
Great. Another question, is there an audit function available in Sample Manager?
So I think I could take this question a few different ways, but yes, if somebody wanted to audit the system, I would grant them read access. And then certainly using the sample timeline or location timeline would be one way to audit the system. You can also go into the full audit log, and we have a variety of things that are being tracked here in not sort of that sample-centric way. And so you're allowed to sort of go through and use this as an auditing tool as well.
Great. And another one, maybe I missed it, but can I export the storage information from freezers? Is there backup in place in case of system outage?
Yeah, so I'll address the first question. And so yes, you will be able to do that. Currently, it's still under development, but right now in all of our grids with samples, we're actually including sort of the stored amount that you have, the freeze thaw count, the storage status, which isn't giving you the full path, and then who, if it's checked out, who it's been checked out by. And so our idea for this is actually being able to export sort of this freezer-centric way that would provide you with that path where you can create a manifest if you're shipping it to somebody else or providing them with that data. And then the second question, Steve, remind me of, it's already left my brain.
Yeah. Is there backup in case of system outage? Yeah,
so if you have, if you choose to go with Sample Manager's hosted product, we're always going to have backups. And so that is something that we would create and both provide those backups for you. Although there's not been many cases that I've both worked with LabKey as a client that was hosted, and now working at LabKey that we've experienced outages like that.
Okay, and another one. You mentioned Sample Manager is cloud hosted. Is it possible to host in a private cloud environment rather than in LabKeys?
Yeah, so in that case, we would really sort of direct you to getting a premium edition of LabKey Server that gives you all of the options for sort of on-premise installation, and that could mean, sort of locally, but if you wanted to host it in your own cloud instance, that would be possible as well.
Okay. Is Sample Manager just for people in my lab, or can I give access to an external collaborator?
Absolutely, you can give access to an external collaborator. In that case, I might provide them with just read-only access, but we have our own authentication if you choose to use it for the standalone Sample Manager product. And so that authentication then, of course, can happen with folks that are outside of your institution as well.
Okay. And we have two more questions. We have time. Where is the help docs for LabKey for Sample Manager located?
It is in, we'll see if I can smoothly transition. For some reason, it's not letting me transition out of this. But it is in our documentation tree. Steve, if you've got it pulled up, but otherwise I'll just sort of play around with it here. Yeah. But you can find it on labkey.org, and it's under the Sample Manager help docs.
Yeah, there's actually a link in the app. I believe it's off your avatar. Yeah. There's a help link in there. Yeah. I'll show that in mine if we can't get to it here. Another question: Do I need to use workflow jobs if I want to move samples from one freezer to another?
No. So what I showed in the demo was just being able to select samples and move them directly in. So workflow jobs are never required to do work in Sample Manager. It's always just a way of helping you do work if you choose to use them.
Great, and I guess we have time. Another question, can the freezer manager code be expanded to be used in another scenario, such as animal/subject location?
Perhaps. I think, we definitely want to talk about what that use case is. But, certainly we can probably mash something together with the current functionality, but I'd be really interested in talking with this person further.
Yeah. And finally, if a sample is checked out, can I find where it was stored originally to put it back where it goes? Do users need to put it back in the same location?
So the first question is sort of whether or not that space is reserved. And yes, so it can be reserved. That the red boxes that we saw, I'm not going to try and switch back to my screen, but the red boxes that we saw in freezer management sort of indicate that there is a sample that used to live there that's currently checked out. The check-in location, that would be sort of the default check-in location, but you can certainly move those samples around both while it's checked out or once it's checked back in.
Great. And that's all the questions we have right now.
Okay, great. Thank you everyone for all of those questions. I really appreciate it. I'm super excited to be able to introduce our user presentation today, Patrick Leyshock from Oregon Health and Science University Knight Cancer Institute, excuse me. He is the Senior Manager of the Data Management System Operations Team. The Knight's Precision Oncology program depends on complete, correct, and integrated collection of clinical and research data. In collaboration with other groups at the university, Leyshock's team designs, implements, and maintains both technologies and work processes for this collection. This presentation will focus on the Knight Cancer Institute's LabKey-based precision oncology data management system, and we'll cover multiple aspects of the system, including its architecture, workflow, and user types. Take it away, Patrick.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Hannah. Can everyone see the title slide?
We can, yep.
Outstanding. Well, again, thank you for the introduction. As Hannah mentioned, my name's Patrick Leyshock. I am with the Knight Cancer Institute at Oregon Health and Science University. I manage the data management system team, which is part of the precision oncology program at the Knight Cancer Institute. So first of all, big thank you to LabKey for the opportunity to present today. It supported us over the years, and it's nice to be able to share what we built with LabKey server. Also want to thank attendees for taking the time out of their day to listen in. And just a reminder as well, if you do have questions, the Zoom conference has a little Q&A button there, and feel free to drop them in. Got about 9 slides today, and I want to share with everybody how we use, at the Knight Cancer Institute, how we use LabKey server to support precision oncology. So I want to start with talking about what precision oncology is, and I'm going to take a page from Josh's book earlier this week, and if you're a physician, you may want to cover your ears as I give a sort of very simple introduction to precision oncology. What is precision oncology? So I think it's helpful to start with what precision oncology is not. And so in the event that of a cancer diagnosis, the status quo when it comes to cancer treatment, and there are exceptions to this, but generally the status quo is, depending on what organ the tumor manifests itself, you were given a treatment. And this is a fairly straightforward approach. Again, there are exceptions to this, but the tumor shows up in the liver, you're given this treatment. Tumor shows up in the lung, you're given this other treatment. So this approach works, again, with exceptions, but this is the general practice. That's not precision oncology. The important thing that this basic status quo approach misses is that at the genomic level, at the microscopic level, at the architectural, at the structural level, two tumors in the same organ in two different individuals may actually be very, very different diseases. So just because two different people both have liver cancer doesn't mean, again, at this fine grain level, that their diseases may be very different things. So that precision oncology wants to understand not liver cancer or lung cancer, but it wants to understand each individual disease at that fine grain level. Given that understanding, wants to make a targeted treatment recommendation for that particular person's tumor. So that is the broad vision of precision oncology. What this requires, as you can gather, is we need to be able to understand each individual's tumor at this fine grain level, at this genomic level, at the structural level, at the microscopic level, at the architectural level. So we need to have this understanding, and we need data, of course, to arrive at this understanding. So we've talked about the status quo of cancer care. We've talked about precision oncology. What about data management? I'll say this very, very respectfully. The physicians at OHSU are world-class. The researchers are top-notch, doing cutting-edge work. But again, respectfully, when it comes to managing data, a lot of these folks can barely use Excel. And again, respectfully, I get that. It's not their job. They're great at what they do. Their job is not to manage data. Examples of the status quo, often, again, especially research data, you've got multiple spreadsheets owned by multiple different people. Data is siloed into different components of software. For example, you might have all your genomics information in a dedicated database. You might have all your specimen data stored in a different database, all your imaging information stored in yet another database. Phrase I heard at last year's LabKey conference was platform fatigue. And this is where you need to, for example, access multiple different systems just to answer simple questions. Questions like, show me all the data we have for this particular patient. So again, the status quo, with some exceptions for data management, there's a lot of room for improvement. And as we've said, a detailed understanding of each patient's tumor arrived at through data is essential for precision oncology. So the status quo in data management simply isn't tenable for doing precision oncology. So that's where our team was brought in. And we were brought in to create a complete and correct collection of data that can be used to do precision oncology. I don't think data management is a solvable problem, so to speak. It's a problem you can mitigate, a problem you can live with, a problem you can minimize. And so, again, that is our charge. Broadly, I won't read this off to folks, but this is the charge, the mission of our team. I'll call out in blue here, just to reference the two main groups of folks we support. We're going to go into a little bit more detail in a few minutes, but roughly, physicians, doctors, are the ones who need good, accurate, correct, and complete data to make clinical decisions. And researchers, of course, need that same data, except they're using it for a different purpose, to do research discovery, hypothesis testing, hypothesis generation. So success for our team, for the data management system team, means that these two groups, clinicians and researchers, can do their jobs easier, that their day-to-day work is easier. What we did in order to do this was to set up an instance of LabKey server that forms the heart of the Knight Cancer Institute's data management system. So three main work areas that our team does. One is to actually set up and maintain the LabKey server instance. Second is to build tools for bringing data in to LabKey. And third is to build tools on top of LabKey that lets users easily visualize and explore and utilize the data. But again, at its core, LabKey is the heart. It is the integration point. It's the, for lack of a better phrase, one-stop shop for data. We don't want platform fatigue. We want to take all the data that's stored in these various silos and bring it into one single place. So let's actually take a look at some screenshots and some examples of how data is used to do precision oncology at the Knight Cancer Institute. So we're pulling all the data from around campus and from different labs, storing it, integrating it in LabKey. Let's suppose we want to have a patient-centric view of the data. Again, simple question. Show me all the data we have for a patient. Better yet, show me all the data we have for a patient and present it to me in a useful way, a way that makes my work as a clinician, as a researcher, easier. Again, simple question, but can be very, very challenging given the data management status quo. A concrete example with in some of the groups we support hold both clinical tumor boards where they consider patient treatments. We call data dives, where they actually focus on one individual patient for hours. Researchers and clinicians in the same room discussing different aspects of the patient's treatment history and what should be done about that. So I want to share with you one of the views we've built on top of and integrated with LabKey server to give a patient-centric view of the data. So you can see a screenshot here. I'm going to pause and just let you take a look at this. So this is a view that we built on top of our LabKey server instance. It's pulling data from the platform. And again, this is a patient-centric view of data, stripped PHI, of course, from it. I want to call your attention to the four main components of this. So in the upper right-hand corner, you'll notice just a basic summary: vital status of the patient, age, gender. What that's doing is surfacing a query that we've written in LabKey server. We call this the basic data display. And again, it's this little bar in the upper right-hand corner. Dominating your field of view, of course, is this what we call the patient view plot. And this is a plot that visually represents data stored in the system. And so you can see we've got the legend. We can toggle on and off various traces. We're representing, in this particular instance, treatments, as well as some biomarkers. If we had lesion size measurements, those would be plotted here as well. The graph is wholly interactive. You can zoom in, zoom out, click on points to call up details about the information that's being represented as a pip on the plot. Again, patient view plot is what you're looking at in the center there. To the right is the third of the four components that make up this page. We call this the clinical narrative sidebar. This is a hand-curated collection of data that's pulled from medical records. It's typically information that doesn't, for example, plot well or be represented well in tabular form, but it's very relevant to the patient's history. So again, we have a team of experts who go in and manually curate this clinical narrative sidebar on the right with information that both researchers and clinicians will find useful. And finally, in the bottom, you'll notice LabKey server grid views. And so what we've done here is taken a collection of grid views and nested them in a tab and sub-tab structure. This is essentially rendering the same data that you see in the plot, for example, except it's in tabular form. And this is useful for folks because while sometimes at a glance it's nice to take a look at a plot, you may want to drill down into the actual tabular data, perhaps export it, download it, do some offline analysis. And what the grid views in this tabbed data browser at the bottom let you do, again, is exploit the functionality of LabKey server out-of-the-box grid view. So again, this is to take a step back. We are looking at a patient-centric view of the data. This is a tool we've built using React, Victory, and Slate, to name a few things. It's also, I'll call it widgetizable. So I've shared with you the four components in this framework, but the framework is extensible. If you wanted to, for example, add a new dedicated plot for some other purpose, you could simply define that, within LabKey server, and it would render and be a component here. All of these components as well can be drag, drop, resize, etc. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. You can customize the page to your liking, depending on what sort of work you're doing. So again, this is a patient-centric view of the data, but of course, not everyone cares about a patient-centric view. You may, for example, want a specimen-centric view of the data. I'll share another view here with folks, and this is what we call the data inventory dash. So what this does briefly, what we see here is each row in this table is a specimen, and you'll notice there's a little arrow in the lower left. If there are child specimens, you can click on the arrow and that'll expand and show all the children that were derived from that specimen. So for example, blood is drawn from a patient. If that blood was separated into two separate files, by toggling on this little arrow, we can show the child specimens that were created from this. Looking at the columns, the left half of the view you see, those are facts about the columns. Stuff very similar to what Hannah just walked us through. For example, the type of sample, pathology record number, if applicable, collection date, etc. And then the circles you see in the right, the columns on the right half of the screen, those are assays that can be run against that sample. The intuition with the data inventory dash is we want to give folks at a glance ability to look at what assays have been run against a particular sample. Again, all that information's out there, but that at a glance functionality is really the value here. So you can quickly and intuitively understand what's going on with each sample. So we've taken a look at two different ways data within the Knight's LabKey server data management system is used by people. Patient-centric view, a sample-centric view. Let's actually take a look at how the data is integrated. So the I'll say high-level architecture. What does it look like? This is a fairly simple diagram. And I think folks will see a few things. First of all, I want to sort of address the layout of this diagram. You'll notice there's a blue dotted line horizontally, equatorial line. Everything above that blue dotted line is user-facing. So it's things that clinicians and researchers are using on a day-to-day basis. Everything below that equator line is back-end, or things that sort of under the hood, what's going on. So taking a look at the stuff in the user-facing half, the top half, a few of these sort of views that look familiar. On the far right side, you can see a snapshot of the data inventory dash. Upper right, you will see the patient view plot. And in the center, you will see a LabKey server grid view. In this case, we have chemotherapy data that's tabularly represented. I want to share with two other new things. We're not going to take a deep dive into them, but I do want to mention them. Recently, we have connected our LabKey server instance to Tableau. And you saw Rob's demo earlier this week about how that works. Soraya Mitri, who manages the data team with the Knight Cancer Institute, has been working hard to create different summary reports using Tableau. These reports pull data from LabKey and then represented in Tableau. And these are custom tailored to particular audiences, but very powerful tool. You can see a little screenshot of it up here. Another thing I want to draw your attention to is this Omero image browser. I'm not sure how many folks out there use Omero, but Omero is a dedicated image management database. Currently at the Knight Cancer Institute, we have several thousand images, primarily histological images. So things like H&E slide scans, IHC slide scans. We have successfully integrated LabKey server as part of our data management system with Omero. We do that in a couple ways. First, every night, LabKey server queries out to the Omero server and says, Omero, give me metadata records for all relevant images. Those metadata records are then pulled into LabKey, stored in a data set that users can interact with through a data set grid view. We've also added a link in that data set that users can click on it, and what that does is launch within their browser a dedicated window that lets them actually dive into the slide, look at the image, zoom in, etc. Very nice functionality. So we've talked about stuff above the line. Spend a couple minutes talking about what's below the line. So we have some very extraordinary partners we work with. One of them is the DEP team, we call them, and they are responsible for maintaining a dedicated data mart, which we've connected to LabKey. And so this is for example, various, again, siloed resources on campus, such as our clinical genomics database, as well as our EPIC, of course, our EHR system, and our sample tracking system, which right now is a BioLibrary LabVantage system. All that data feeds into the Knight data mart, where we do some sort of data organization. We then pull that data into LabKey server using LabKey server's ETL processes. Very easy to set up and maintain, and again, those run on a schedule so that we know we have fresh data on a daily basis within LabKey. Also talked about Omero, we already talked about that. And also manual data entry. And so typically for each type of data, for example, chemotherapy data, we pull in records through an ETL process. But since we only have access through our ETL feeds to data that is, records of treatments that are done at OHSU or the Knight Cancer Institute, this doesn't give us all the data we need. For example, suppose someone was treated years ago in a different state. We want to know that a person received that particular chemotherapy treatment. But again, that's not stored locally in the OHSU EPIC system. So we have this is one of the responsibilities of Sarai's team, performs manual data entry directly into LabKey server. That manually entered data is then integrated with the ETL data and presented to the users in a single view of the data. Within LabKey server itself, we make extensive use of the study module. That's the heart, so lots of data sets, as well as a number of lists that constitutes the system. So just a couple more slides and we'll wrap up. This slide here shows the groups that we work with. And you'll remember back on an earlier slide, we talked about two main groups of users. Those were physicians or clinicians and researchers. On this slide here, you'll see in blue typical ways that each group of users use our data management system. And in braces to the right of those blue text, you'll see work that the DMS team does to support those groups. So along the top, you'll see the researchers. I mentioned researchers earlier. Those break down into two main types. Biological researchers, think of these as classically trained wet bench researchers. Computational researchers, perfect example, if you have a computational biology program or department at your institution, that is what they do. Typically, biological and computational researchers are asking very similar questions. Where they differ is the tools they use to actually do their work. Computational researchers, for example, are much more liable to use the API or APIs offered up in LabKey server than biological researchers, who are much more likely to use the UI to explore data. Clinicians are down in the lower left. Again, these are the people who are actually treating patients and using data stored in the data management system to do so. Then a group we haven't talked about much to date is the support group in the lower right-hand corner of the slide. I think this group is vital, and then we talked a little bit in an earlier slide about this. I think the best exemplar of a support team is the data team that Sarai Amici leads. Group is responsible for many things, including One is manual data entry, as we touched on earlier. Second is actually performing QC of the data. So once data is in the system, we need to make sure that it is correct. And Soraya's team is trained to do this. We use LabKey servers out of the box QC workflow to do that. And finally, generate reports and data. This is something that the data team is increasingly doing. This involves everything from writing Tableau reports, as we talked about a few minutes ago, as well as simply using user-defined queries in LabKey server and surfacing those as query reports within the study containers. So a brief history, and then we're going to wrap up. The Knight Cancer Institute's LabKey server-based data management system began life as a research project, depending how you count, about 5 years ago. Initially rolled out as a Stand Up to Cancer project. The Brennan Colson Center for Pancreatic Care, who manages the Oregon Pancreatic Tumor Registry, was the first on-site, and by that I mean at OHSU group, to actually embrace the data management system that we have been looking at today. Appreciate their support. A few years ago, we began supporting serial measurements of molecular and architectural responses to therapy, or SMART. Is the short way of saying that. Began life as an observational protocol, since has evolved and matured into a portfolio of clinical trials, starting with breast cancer, moving to other disease groups. In next steps, I mentioned all this organizational history just to set the context for next steps. So the LabKey system that we've been talking about, it began life as a small-scale research project. It's since grown into an institutional resource, something that dozens of people log into every day. So our charge as a team is the same, but success looks a little bit different, having matured again from a research project to an institutional resource. Got a number of next steps, things we're working on. We're lumping them right now under strengthening and scaling. One of the things we want to be able to do, for example, is to onboard a new clinical trial protocol within a given amount of time. We know that new trials are coming down, and we want to be ready to create containers and areas for them within our data management system to do that. We also know there's interest in utilizing and querying data across different trials. What this would mean effectively is querying across different projects in LabKey. Figuring out how to do that while ensuring that the data is interoperable. Remember, that's the I in FAIR is one of our upcoming goals. And finally, integrating with additional components of the Knight's data management ecosystem. We're already integrating, as we mentioned, with Omero as well as the Knight Data Mart. But again, there's always new components being added as the ecosystem grows and matures. So we're pretty excited. We just wrapped up a pilot project where we have deployed per protocol containers, or in this case, operationally, those are per protocol projects within our instance of LabKey server, and looking into, again, sort of strengthening and scaling through that approach. So with that, I will stop. I'm a few minutes over. I want to say thank you to, this is just, I italicized especially, there's a lot more people we want to say thank you to, but especially this group. And again, thank you to LabKey for the opportunity to present today. And with that, I will be happy to take any questions.
Excellent job, Patrick. That was great. We do have a few questions here, and I'll try and summarize them as I can. So the first one refers, I believe, to one of the screenshots you shared on the patient-centric overview. Are those patient history notes in your sidebar manually transcribed from EHR clinical notes, pulled from an intermediate database, which sources the EHR, or are they pulling the notes directly from the EHR?
That's a great question, and I encourage you, if you're trying to make sense of those particular notes, please don't, because that is again, it's sort of a mock-up mishmash of various notes. So those are manually curated. We've met with physicians numerous times over the years. The format and the content for those notes has changed over time, but you know, certainly in the recent past, that's involved a trained specialist logging into, for example, Epic, and poring over PDFs and handwritten notes, scans, and physicians' documents, and sort of distilling exactly what mattered to doctors, and then manually entering in. The WYSIWYG editor that we built on that view was meant to make data entry and curation of the data a little bit easier and more intuitive.
Awesome. And how do you manage PHI or PII, and do you have any differing needs between clinicians and researchers in terms of their access to that data?
Yep, that's one of our. That's a good question. Right now, I should add, we do not share the data outside of the institution, and we're using LabKey's permissions functionality to limit access to the data. So basically, you can't see the data if you're not in some way, shape, or form part of the particular protocol. I did mention that eventually one of our goals is to allow cross-project or cross-protocol querying of the data. I think we know we're gonna need to come up with a little more refined and nuanced way to either de-identify or protect PHI to make sure that we're compliant and within regulatory constraints to do that. But for now, you can't see the data unless you can see the data.
Great. And we have a couple of Omero questions. So Rochester is also integrating with the Omero.web viewer. How is authentication performed when you link out to Omero? Is it a single sign-on between the two systems?
No, at this time, to take a concrete example, if you click on the link we have metadata for images stored in Omero is stored on a LabKey server data set. One of the fields in that for each record is a link. Clicking on that fires up the browser, or fires up a different window in your browser that lets you navigate the image. When that first window fires up, you need to log in using your credentials into the Omero server. So you log in once to LabKey, you log in again when you access Omero.
And that was such a thorough answer that you actually answered the next question. So that was great. Thank you so much, Patrick.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Steve Hanson, our Director of User Education at LabKey, presenting on extending Sample Manager with LabKey Server.
Thank you, Hannah. Let me share my screen here. In this presentation, I'm going to take a look at how to really extend the functionality of Sample Manager by using LabKey Server. We're gonna take a look at how to take the already amazing toolkit of Sample Manager and really supercharge it by using some of the broader tool set of LabKey Server. So I'm having, okay, great. Well, first question you might have is, well, why use them together? And I think there are a couple of answers. First, using these two tools simultaneously will really help you facilitate any different team roles you have around data. Some people are data managers, other people are more like data generators. Also, it will help you facilitate different LabKey skill levels. Not everybody in your organization may be a LabKey server power user. And it also will help you facilitate or leverage some of the product-specific features in each of these tools. In terms of team role optimization, Sample Manager is really optimized for people working in the lab, people that are generating data, importing data, assembling data, and as more of a day-to-day type activity. Whereas whereas LabKey Server is really optimized for data administration, QC reviewers, quality control reviewers, data analysts, queryers of the data, explorers of the data, and also for people that are building, portals into the data, portals that are designed for, say, the general public or for some other team out there. Also, these two tools give you a way to really address different skill levels in your team. Sample Manager is really usable with little or no training. I think you can almost figure it out just by playing around with it. Maybe you'll have to dip into the docs a little bit for some items, but I mean, I think if you're familiar with software, I think Sample Manager is just beautiful at you can teach yourself how to use it essentially. Sample Manager also presents a very focused, non-distracting UI. Whereas, LabKey Server, I think training is at least recommended. You certainly need to look at some of the docs for some of the use cases. And because LabKey Server is a platform, it has a very broad multi-purpose UI. And so you really need to kind of think a little bit when you're using LabKey Server. On the Sample Manager side, things like data relationships tend to just happen. If you're importing samples and you're importing assay data, I think you'll just find that they're linked kind of for you. You don't have to do much to make that happen. Whereas in LabKey Server, if you want to build relationships between your data, you need to think a little bit. You need to put some intentionality into it. It's not just going to happen for you automatically. Also, Sample Manager, it's foolproof to a certain degree. There's lots of user prompts and safeguards to kind of keep you on the path. And that may not be the case in Sample Manager. In LabKey Server. Also, Sample Manager, although it's ultimately based in LabKey Server, there are specific features that each tool surfaces that can't be found in the other. For Sample Manager, I'm thinking of workflow, the jobs workflow that Hannah was showing earlier. The freezer management system, something that's only surfaced in Sample Manager. And also the barcoding that's just around the corner. Whereas LabKey Server has its own set of tools which are unique to it, or at least uniquely surfaced in LabKey Server. Like combining with other kinds of data, like data sets and clinical data. Compliance and de-identification of PHI data. Visualization tools. QC and auditing. Portals and data presentations. And in general, just unlimited software DIY features. And there's a large ... at the end of this list. LabKey Server's feature list goes on and on. Well, you might be asking yourself here like, well, how are LabKey Manager and LabKey Server related? Like, what do they have to do with one another? And the answer is really they're really the same thing. At least they're based in the same thing. Sample Manager is really just a selected toolkit out of the larger toolkit, which is LabKey Server. So I think a nice metaphor to use is sort of the box of crayons metaphor. Sample Manager is a very bespoke, focused set of crayons, carefully selected to do certain tasks. LabKey Server is the giant mega box of crayons. It has everything in it. There's no end to it. And metaphors always break down a little bit. Hannah said when she was looking at this slide, she said, this isn't a perfectly adequate metaphor because LabKey server even kind of lets you make your own crayons. It's so broad and so powerful. To make this a little more concrete and visceral for you, I thought we'll just do a little demonstration here to show you exactly how all these pieces are put together and related. So here is my sample manager demo. It's just very simple. I've got all the things here or most of the things here that Hannah was showing earlier. I've got some samples, some blood, PBMC and plasma samples. I've got some jobs going here. And I've got an assay, a CBC or complete blood counts assay. And I thought I'd show you around a little bit, but we're going to quickly kind of jump into LabKey server. But let's take a look, and actually I just want you to just remember some ID numbers here. Here's my blood samples. Here's my grid of blood samples. I've got 10 of them. And notice, just kind of remember, look at these column names. I have a project column, a volume, received operator, and I've got these blood IDs, blood-1001, 1002. Great. If we surf into one of these blood samples, we see that it has some lineage. It's been broken up or aliquoted or processed into 5 different PBMC and plasma samples. And it also comes from a source, a participant source. And this, if you're familiar with the LabKey study module, this is a hint of what's to come. This blood is also connected to, or has had, some assay data associated with it. This blood count assay was run on this sample, and here are the results for it. There's a timeline as well. Let's also go over to my assay data. Here I have my blood count assay data. I've got 2 runs of data. If we look at the results, we can see, again, there's my blood vial, 1001. And notice, though, there's some other features here that didn't appear in Hannah's demo. There's a column here called Copied to Example Research Study. And there's also a QC flag here that happens to be appearing in this grid. These are all features that are just sort of, if you like, shining through from this LabKey server functionality that's just below the surface here. Let's also look at the participants. This is a source. This is emerging as a source in this sample manager here. But just want you to take note of these participant IDs. Well, as I said, this is really just a window. The LabKey sample manager is really just a window on a LabKey server instance, which is sitting underneath it. And we can pop down a level into the server just by clicking this right here. Notice everything's different now. At least the UI is different. Right now, I'm looking at the same data, blood 1001. It's the same assay results. And I'm looking at a very similar assay grid, but the UI is a little different. The interface is a little different. And notice I have a whole set of tabs here. This is the LabKey server view of the very same data. And if you're familiar with LabKey server study modules, this is a LabKey server study. a LabKey server study is an environment for working with clinical data and combining clinical data with other kinds of data like samples and assay data. So if you like our sample manager solar system of data, which consists of samples, assays, and sources, is revealed here to be part of just a larger galaxy of data, of clinical data, that I can combine it with and just continue to do all kinds of different operations upon, just to give you a sense of some of the things I can do with this data. I've actually isolated the sample and assay data onto this tab. And again, it's the very same data. It's blood, PBMC, and plasma data. The very same assay results are here. And let's drill into that blood detail view again. Here's LabKey server's view of the blood grid. And here is LabKey server's view of the details around blood 1001. There's its parent source, participant 101. And I can even see lineage graphs of this, but in sort of that LabKey server style of doing these graphs. I've also, now that I'm in this larger data galaxy, see all the other data that's surrounding my samples. Here's a whole set of clinical data sets that are sitting right next to my samples and my assay data. And I can do things like visualize my assay data in this environment. So if I wanted to get a sense of the distribution of, say, white blood cells in this assay, I can do a quick visualization there. Or I've built some other visualizations here that are available. Here, this visualization actually combines the assay data with the, I can actually combine my assay data with some clinical data, which I've done right here in this grid, This pulse column, I pulled that in from a clinical data set, the physical exam data, which is right over here. This physical exam grid, I just pulled out that pulse column and laid it alongside my assay data so I can build visualizations on that if I want to. Notice also, I've added some quality control markers to this data here, to my blood count assay. Some of this stuff has passed review, and some of it has yet to be reviewed. Also, some of this data originally from Sample Manager has been copied into the study. Once you copy assay data into a study, it means you're able to integrate it with those other clinical data sets. I could go on and on. I want to make sure we have time for questions. Anything I'm missing here? I should say another key feature, which I haven't mentioned yet, is working with compliance and PHI data and de-identifying data. That's something that is also easy to do once you're in the LabKey server interface. Again, I could go on and on, but I think I would assume there's going to be a lot of questions about this. This is, in some sense, a bit of uncharted territory for people. And, oh, I'm sorry, there's one other thing I wanted to show you. I also have configured a connection between one of the clinical data sets and the sources, the participant sources table back in Sample Manager. And I did that by using something called an ETL, which stands for extract, transform, load. Basically, it's a way of piping data from one table to another. In this case, I've set up a pipe between this demographics data set and my sources, my participant sources table over in Sample Manager. And you can see that here, if I add a new participant, or excuse me, let's just edit a participant here. I'm going to edit participant 101. And right now, I have him from Canada. He's a Canadian citizen, but I'm going to say that was a mistake. He's actually a US citizen. If I edit that, and then go back over to my Sample Manager. Oh, I've got to fix my links here. Excuse me. Yeah. Sorry, I have to hack my URL here. You can see that it will update the participants table automatically. There is my participant 101 is now a USA citizen inside Sample Manager. I'm sure there've got to be some questions out there about this. And Hannah, please take a look at the Q&A panel.
Absolutely. So I can both sort of ask and help answer in some of these cases as well. We have one user asking whether or not LabKey can support microbiology data, such as organism identification and sort of this idea of multiple drug minimum inhibitory concentration assays and drug therapy interpretations for each sample. And so my answer to that would be absolutely.
Sure.
I think, you know, if the structure of how we have laid out data in Sample Manager sort of makes sense to you, I think certainly it can be customized for those uses. There may be a need, as Steve had showed here, to use LabKey Server for that as well, depending on what the requirements are. But certainly it's flexible to all types of data. Another question is, how does the data get copied from Sample Manager to LabKey Server?
Yeah,
go ahead, Steve.
It's a really interesting question. It really isn't. It really already is there. This is something I really want to stress, that there really are just Sample Manager and LabKey Server are really just two windows on the same stuff. I didn't do anything here to copy data anywhere except for that one little ETL. That's all I really did. But that's just a minor part of this. In 99% of the data here is all just the same data, different interfaces on the same stuff.
Yep, and sort of to further that point, you know, the ETL module is part of our premium editions as well that Steve used to sort of set this up. And along those lines, we have another question on sort of piping those participants into sources. So is there a way to fully integrate Sample Manager with the study module, which would include links to samples to both participants and visits? And frankly, you know, that's something that we are continuing to strive towards, both on the Sample Manager and LabKey Server side. And so, you know, we look forward to client feedback on how they would want this to work, but definitely this is on our roadmap that we continue to consider, you know, enhancing.
Yeah. But by the way, my training today is going to focus largely on this case. And I'm going to talk a lot about integrating assay and sample data with study clinical data. So there's just a lot to say about that. And so tune into that if you want to see more of this.
And then a couple more questions here, since we have the time. There's a person who's interested in adding visualizations to LabKey server. So are the web part visualizations, I'm assuming that they're talking about, unique to Sample Manager, or can they be created just within the server?
Well, certain visualizations, really the ones that you sort of make your own out of your own data, that's really a LabKey server functionality. Like all of these visualizations I've built on my data, those are really part of LabKey server. They're not really surfaced in Sample Manager. Whereas, nevertheless, Sample Manager has many built-in visualizations that you don't really build yourself that are unique to it. So it's sort of two answers there for you.
Exactly. And you know, specifically towards lineage visualizations, as Steve showed, there is the visualization in Sample Manager, but we also have a similar visualization, not the exact same one, in LabKey server. And then what is involved to initiate Sample or Freezer Manager if you already use LabKey server? So this actually goes, I think, with a few other questions that people have been asking. And so if you have a premium edition of LabKey right now, Sample Manager is available. If you've got a release this year, so starting at 20.3 or later, Sample Manager is actually an option when you create projects or update your folder. You can add the sample management module, and that will be sort of available directly. If you are using the community edition of LabKey server and want to use Sample Manager on top of that, we definitely recommend upgrading to a premium edition where that would be part of your distribution. And then, oh, Steve, do you mind actually circling back to show us the Sample Manager documentation from within the app, since that wasn't something I was able to show?
Sure. So I believe it is off of the avatar. If you go to help, you'll end up at our fabulous docs here. There's tutorials. There's a really nice getting started tutorial that takes you really through all the major features here. So that's just to make sure you saw that. It's off of my little avatar. There's a chevron there, and then there's a help link right there.
Great. And then, is data synchronized between LabKey server and Sample Manager, or do you have to manually refresh or rerun those ETLs?
In my case, I have my ETL running on a 10-second schedule, so it just does it. And again, I want to stress the ETL is a tiny part of this. Really, there is no syncing of the data. It's really just two different interfaces on the same data. You can actually work the data from both sides. If you change data in one spot, it's going to change in the other just because it's the same data.
And then I think one last question here. Can you put a link on the LabKey server side visualization into one of the visible fields in Sample Manager? And so I think here, you know, what you might be referring to is providing sort of those links. And as you saw Steve sort of hack that URL to get into Sample Manager, absolutely, you can always add the URL entry into a field in LabKey server that would sort of link you out to the relevant Sample Manager data that you're looking for.
Yeah, that's actually a really fun idea for training, my training today. I think a really fun exercise would be to turn these links Right now they link back into LabKey server. It would be very easy to make this link go to its analog in Sample Manager. So we'll do that today.
Great. So I think sort of in the interest of time, I'll just answer one last question here, and then we'll follow up with everybody else individually. How can this person get to trial Sample Manager? I don't have my screen sharing here, but if you go to labkey.com, there is a place that will allow you to sign up for a demo, and we can certainly set up a trial for you and get you started with that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Steve.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you have a great afternoon. Oh, Steve, do you want to show the upcoming presentations for tomorrow?
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, there is, the program continues tomorrow. Tomorrow is our Tech Talk Day. And Adam Rauch, to start the day, is going to be talking about the My Studies initiative, which is a new use of LabKey Server to support tablet and phone-based studies. Carl Loom is then going to talk about file watchers, which is a really powerful way to just automate your data import into LabKey Server. Susan is going to talk about how to build LabKey Server from source. Nick is going to give us some presentations on building, on extending LabKey Server with JavaScript and especially using React. Binal is going to present on data integration, especially around clinical data integration, what I just sort of touched on today. And Stuart and Isa are going to give us a look at best practices around cloud hosting.
Great. We look forward to seeing and hearing from all of you tomorrow, and have a great afternoon.